Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Mad Mouth, and we want to welcome everybody to the holiday version of the Sports Exchange. We're running out of days of the year, that's for sure, and I'm proud to be joined by my co-host, Stuart Hack. Stuart, welcome back.
Hey, Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and our special guest tonight is Professor Phil Lewis. And Professor, please give us an introduction about yourself.
Hi, well, I teach at the University of Albany, and my featured course is Sociology of Sports, and went to school with the other box in the Zoom session, Stu Hack, and did some radio games with Stu. The sports classes have been very successful, and I'm always glad to talk about anything related to the discipline of sports and sociology.
Okay, Stuart, take over.
Okay, Phil, so you were a regular guest on the old Hack Attack on Sports show, and one of the shows that you came on and talked about was the future of sports. And at the end of that show, we kind of alluded to esports. It wasn't a big thing. So my first question is the future now?
It is, and it's happening, under the radar to some extent and above the radar in another extent. It really is a very generational type of situation. To us, I think those of us who watch mainstream sports and focus on things that are, traditional, might not appreciate the growth of esports. But yes, in an economic and in a social way, esports is here now and has been for a while.
What do you think the pandemic did as far as maybe accelerating that?
Well, it certainly laid the groundwork for it, and it certainly provided the infrastructure for the opportunity to continue competition and the interest in esports. At Albany, the only team that's been active since for the entire fall semester was the esports team. It's interesting. It's very technical, more so than you might think, because they were able to shift very easily from their arena, and most schools that have esports teams have invested a fair amount in their technology, but they're also able to pivot very quickly to playing from home. So these same student athletes, or we can talk about whether they're athletes or not, were able to shift very quickly back to their dorms or their homes and continue on with almost no interruption at all.
So what were the origins of this? How did it get started?
Well, I'm sure both of you played video games at home, in the 80s and 90s, and it was kind of just a thing to do. It was very slow in becoming advanced, and slowly. I like to relate it to Star Trek conventions. Star Trek convention started in a New Jersey library of people that just wanted to get together and talk about Star Trek, and it evolved into this multi-million-dollar franchise where the former Star Trek actors got together and did these things at conventions every year, and it was very similar to that. Video games started in the 60s, but the first competition really started in the 70s. And the interesting thing is a lot of the advancement of esports has sort of happened in the areas of universities. It started at Stanford University in 1972, and the first competition with this at stake was a one-year subscription to Rolling Stone magazine. Now the prizes are in the tens of millions of dollars. So it's really come a very long way, but it's very generational. And as you mentioned, Stu, when I first started talking about this in my class, it just got a tremendous buzz from the students about it. A very interesting reaction from students who had largely, some of them had not been very active in participating in the class's discussions. But all of a sudden, there was this very strong response. And each semester, I've been adding to it. And I think I mentioned to you, Stu, offline, that I had a student who mentioned that he was making about $6,000 a week or $6,000 a month streaming on Twitch, which I've confirmed later on, not with that individual student, but that it's possible to do that. There's a lot of money involved, at least at certain levels. But it started in the 60s and 70s, and then in the 90s, it really started to take off. And now the estimates are that the esports industry is about $1 billion industry.
So how does it go from the convention to where it becomes a collegiate sport?
It's an interesting question. It partially just because of the internet's ability to make it more available through platforms like Twitch, and also because some universities have started offering scholarships. Believe it or not, they're scholarships, merit aid, financial aid, but an interest in advancing it as a sport in the portfolio of the university. And also because there has been corporate sponsorship of these things. I had in my class a couple of guys who work for Delaware North. Delaware North is a company that does largely catering at the major, when there was large crowds at the arenas for most of the major sports. They're the ones who do most of the catering there, but they're owned by Jeremy Jacobs, who's the owner of the Boston Bruins. And they've sponsored a lot of things, brought up, cultivated a lot of interest. Michael Jordan has invested about $26 million in Team Liquid. I think that's Scott's. You have a T-shirt from Team Liquid, I believe, right, Scott?
Yeah, it sounds like
you're wearing it right now. Yeah, he's invested about $26 million. Stephen Curry's invested a lot of money. Major League Baseball isn't getting involved. They were scheduled to have a tournament over in China. Just I think around the time the pandemic hit, so I think that was postponed. But nonetheless, there's been a lot of interest from a lot of different segments of society, and young people have a lot of free time and a fair amount of this, money to spend. So that's really how it accelerated.
So, like the person in your class that's making money doing this now, they're not eligible to play this on a collegiate level, correct? Or
well,
they can't.
That's the interesting part about this. Esports is still going through the Wild West period of its existence from a intercollegiate point of view. The NCAA has nothing to do directly with esports, which means there are no rules. There are very few rules, for better or for worse. UAlbany, a lot of other schools compete in conferences. So, for example, UAlbany competes in the ECAC, which you've probably heard of, but it's not formally under the auspices of the NCAA. What's interesting is that the NAIA, which is that sort of parallel universe that exists in intercollegiate sports that very few people talk about on the major outlets, tends to be more of a receptive to a loose set of rules, even in basketball and football. So if I had to make a guess, I would think that it would be more prone to, more likely to go under the umbrella of the NAIA, although when there's enough money in it, intercollegiately, I think the NCAA might have an interest in it when they think it's time to protect the student athletes. But it is still a period of time where you can compete in as many or as few games as you want. It's co-ed in some areas, not co-ed in others. There is, you can have as many teams in as you want. And to answer your question directly, there are no formal amateurism rules. For example, just to get ready for my class, I turned on ESPN one time to watch the Madden finals, the Madden finals. And a young man, I don't know, can't pronounce his name exactly because he uses a nickname, was playing. They were talking about how he was unranked and he'd come up through the rankings and got himself to the finals and had beaten all these ranked players. And he lost very badly in the finals, but he was on national television and was obviously very good. So I was talking to the head coach at UAlbany, who's well, we could talk about that in a minute, but I was talking to the head coach at UAlbany about him, and he said, by the way, he goes here. He goes to UAlbany. I said, well, that's great. You have this rank, this terrific players. No, he doesn't play. He doesn't compete because he makes too much money playing in these tournaments. But he could, if he wanted to, still play on the UAlbany team. He just doesn't have time. It wasn't about the amateurism rules. It's just early, it's the infancy stages, even though it's been around, this, esports has been around for a while, but from an intercollegiate point of view, it's really in its infancy stages, and it hasn't settled into where it's going to be eventually, I think. So right now, Stu, if you want to go back to school, you can compete in esports and also play on the intercollegiate team as well.
Is Centipede part of that? Because I think I might, I could.
Well, no, and there are a lot of different games they play, but it's a finite number. Madden is one of them, but League of Legends is one that is by far and away the most popular sport. I mean, there are obviously others, but these are these multiplayer games where there's a lot of teamwork involved, and they wear the headsets and they coordinate things. And I've talked to a couple of different head coaches. By the way, just as a quick funny story, before UAlbany formally got a team, they were playing as a club level, and they were playing under the name of the Insane Danes at the time. And St. Rose College, which is down the road from UAlbany, they had established their team earlier, and their head coach is a guy named Dan Marino. Seriously, and I invited him to come speak to the class, and he introduces himself. Doesn't look anything like the former Miami Dolphin, and he comes in, he says, "By the way, my name is Dan Marino," and everybody kind of is quiet. And he goes, "No, I'm not him, but I have as many Super Bowl rings." So that's how he breaks the ice. But anyway,
hopefully he's a lot nicer than the other one, because I give you stories on the other one that you don't want to have to hear. But that'll be
maybe another time, Scott.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so. There is, I kind of lost where we were still.
The St. Rose coach.
No, I know, but I forgot how we got to that point. We can just skip.
Oh, because Albany started out as a club team, so they.
Right. But St. Rose, some other schools were ahead of them, but they recruit. They go. I mean, I think this is what we're talking about. But the coaches I've been talking to. That's right. And so I've talked to two head coaches, that our head coach and also Dan Marino. And it's just very interesting. They're traveling the country recruiting. They are going to high schools, and some high schools are even having esports teams where they're being noticed. And the coaching. That's what I meant. Sorry, let me get sidetracked. I said to them, how do you coach in esports? Aren't the kids just naturally, don't they have fast twitch, the responses in their thumbs and things like that? And apparently a lot of it has to do with making good decisions, not panicking, and also working with their teammates. So there is a certain degree of coaching that goes on. So it's not as unstructured or just talent laden as you might think, but there are certain players who are just better than the other ones. And while it doesn't seem like winning and losing is the primary objective as much as it would be in basketball or football or something else, there is a lot of interest in it at the university level, for a number of reasons. But
now you look at a basketball coach. A lot of times they have a background. They used to play basketball. Football used to play football. What kind of backgrounds are these esports coaches? What kind of backgrounds do they come in with?
Yeah, well, both of them that I met were gamers. They both were involved with gaming themselves to one degree or another, so they know the mechanics and the schematics of these games. But at University of Albany, the head coach is actually a professor in the Homeland Security and Emergency Services department. So
he's video game right there.
Well, yeah, exactly. But he's very involved with digital platforms and applications and informatics and things like that. So it's he was someone who knows a lot about digital platforms. So he, and also had a background in gaming. I don't think you can come off the street and just say, well, I played Centipede like you and I did, a few years ago and become a coach. And these are people that have had, a good exposure to the games, but they're not necessarily ranked players, in the sense that they were, champions, and then they're trying to transfer that knowledge to the younger players. It's more so that they understand, as I say, it's complicated in the sense that technology has a lot to do with it too. So the fact that Michael Lazinski, the coach at UAlbany, has a background in digital platforms is very important, because when they're in that arena and the university has a dedicated high-speed internet connection. That can be that low latency can be the difference between winning and losing. When somebody clicks on their trigger, it's milliseconds before there's a response. But when you're home, it's a little bit more latency because you're on you're sharing your bandwidth with your sister upstairs watching a movie, or you just don't have as high a speed internet connection or whatever. So a lot of this also comes down to technology, and there's a fair amount of cheating that goes on with that as well.
Wow. Now take me through this. Say Albany State is playing St. Rose. How does that work? How many players are on each or playing for each school, and how does it work? How do you determine who wins?
Yeah, it's interesting. They have a general interest meeting, kind of like when you and I were going out for the college radio station. In that same respect, where it's just let's see who's interested, and then they start not necessarily having tryouts, but they look at their resume in a sense. Are they ranked? So if they're ranked on Twitch or some other platform, that goes a long way in deciding whether they're going to get on the team. But there's a lot of interest in making sure that the teams are co-ed, that the teams are, the players are holding up their academic standards, even though there aren't necessarily formal university standards for it. So it's almost as if it's to some degree a social experiment, and to some degree take into account the outside performance of these young people who are almost all playing somewhere else, and can also be simultaneously playing somewhere else and at the university level.
Now, how does the actual matchup work once the teams are playing? So Albany's playing St. Rose. How does that work?
It depends on the game. League of Legends, it's a larger number of people that are playing. If it's Madden, it's me against you. So it can be 1-on-1. It can be, it can be 4-on-4. It can be 5-on-5. Again, I'd like to give you a clearer answer, but it kind of, there's a great degree of variance. It really depends on the game. They're playing. So yeah, I mean, that's the best answer I can give you. It really kind of depends on the game, and whether they almost have like a JV as well. So they're trying to get as many people on, into competitions as they can. So sometimes it's going to be, they're going to relax the rules a little bit more. Just a lot of stuff going on a lot of the time. What the biggest interest that goes on when you see them when they sold out, there was this discussion of where esports people. What's really interesting about esports isn't necessarily the fact that, your son would get a scholarship, or your niece would get a scholarship. That's not what's necessarily interesting. What's interesting is the tremendous appeal of people going to watch other people playing video games. And they sold out Texas Stadium for a week, 800,000 people over the course of, a week or so. So what's most notable is when they have these big finals, like this young man that I talked about who lost in Madden, in the Madden finals. That's what the high profile things are. But there's it's almost like, and that's why it's interesting. There are a lot of parallels to other kinds of sports. Just like if you ask me about these travel teams in baseball, well, how many games is a person playing? Well, some are playing every weekend. Some are playing just in the summer. Some are playing 2 games a day. Some are playing it's just a lot of stuff going on because it's just there's an appetite for it.
Phil, what I'm really amazed, Professor, is the industry that it's really become. Because as I understand, going through some of the information that I have, is that esports is what generated $10 million in prize money in 2017. That to me is unbelievable.
That was just, that's the top prize at the time. That's not common now, but it's more common now. But yeah, the money's big. But again, there's a lot of corporate sponsorship. There's a lot of seats. There had been a lot of seats being sold. I would imagine that's going to continue. But these corporations like Delaware North and the professional baseball, Major League Baseball, they're all in on it because and again, this is another parallel to the larger sports society. The fact that there's lots of research being done about young people and their consumption of the media. And we know now that young people are not watching entire baseball games. As much as Rob Manfred would like to speed up the game,
Right.
it's not fast enough for these people, because these young people, because they're getting highlights on their phones. They're satisfied with the fact that they're seeing all the scoring going on without having to wait for the commercials and having to wait for they're getting commercials, but they're not having to wait for the stuff that happens in between. So they're consuming it, by highlight. They're using two screens when they are consuming sports. So, esports is filling in that niche. And again, now, not only are they competing, but they're also watching it on these platforms, because you can play it even under these circumstances.
So if I'm reading you right, you're telling me that the attention span is just so much less now. It almost seems like that way to me, that the attention span nowadays is just not as high, which enables esports to more or less pick up the slack, if you know where I'm coming from.
I hear what you're saying, Scott, but it's very hard to determine the independent versus dependent variables. This is the fact that these things are available that's making it possible for them to have, shorter attention spans, or is it the fact that they have shorter attention spans that there's been this assimilation to platforms where they can get their information that way? It's not quite clear. We certainly know that Major League Baseball and other sports have tried to take advantage of that, but at the same time, when I'm recording my lectures this semester, I'm trying not to make them more than 15-20 minutes, because not so sure that the students are going to stay around. So it's hard to tell. But yeah, there's something like that going on.
So when you talk about the way that this has grown, and I know that in 2006, the Worldwide Web Games Championship hosted 71 players who competed for $1 million in grand prize. Can you elaborate on how that played out?
Which tournament was that?
You're talking about the Worldwide Web Games Championship?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just, the other part about it, the money's also coming from the networks. I mean, ESPN and other platforms are also putting money into it. So, the bigger question is, how long it will last. It seems like it's getting more popular by the year, but the track record for the big prize money is relatively short. So, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, the longer traditional sports are sidelined and fans can't go, the more it's going to put people into the direction. But it's also, as I mentioned before, I think largely based upon the age groups that are involved. And, it seems to be extremely popular with college age and high schools, kids.
I think when people talk, I'm sorry, Stuart. I think when people talk about relative numbers, I'm going over yet a little bit more information. 28% of esports fans across 4 countries think that esports should be considered an Olympic sport, meaning that 41% think that esports should be considered a collegiate university sport. Do you mind going over that again, please?
Sure. No, I mean, in fact, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but the big one there is about Olympic. In fact, there was a lot of push for esports to be a demonstration sport. And in fact, in the Paris Games in 2024, again, hoping that everything lines up after this year, it is scheduled to be a demonstration sport in the 2024 Summer Olympics. So yeah, from not only the micro view, but also from the macro view, it does certainly seem like there's growth potential for it. I think that, it's hard to tell with demonstration sports. Stu's favorite sport, baseball, was the demonstration sport in the Olympics, and it never went anywhere.
Actually, now that you brought that up, I was at Dodger Stadium in 1984 when the United States took on Korea, and I was actually surprised it didn't go any further than that. So it's interesting how you talk about the correlation between that demonstration sport with baseball back in '84. Sorry to interrupt you, but you did kind of
okay.
Remember there.
I think the big thing that esports has going for it that baseball might not, is that the esports can easily be shown on television. You can you can see what the players are doing. There can be split screens between the gameplay and the players. You can hear the communication. in the headsets that are going on, which are very important in terms of strategy and coaching and things like that. So yeah, I think it's gonna play well, certainly through the demonstration phase, and we'll see what happens after that. But yeah, no, I mean it's a scholarship sport now at over 115 colleges and universities. It's scheduled to be an Olympic sport, or at least in the demonstration phase. A lot of celebrities. That when we were talking earlier on, Stu, about the future of sport and where that was projected to go, what hasn't really happened, and a lot of people are talking about, is two things. One is that they're expecting celebrities to be involved with being competitors in esports to bring up even more interest in it, because your favorite actor, your favorite TV, personality or whatever, they get involved with it. Or even if you got a Stephen Curry or probably not Michael Jordan, but a younger player involved to sit down in a chair and compete would also be a lot of interest. But the other thing I think is very interesting about esports is that component of the potential cheating. It's right. The more money that's involved, the more that's at stake, the more likely you have deviance. And what I've heard was that there are things, first of all, about the speed of the internet connection, but also the fact that in many cases, especially in the intercollegiate, Wild West, in a lot of cases, some ringers are being used. So, you might be, it's kind of like all the old softball leagues where, they have somebody on the roster until, just play the whole season and the playoffs come, and then you get your big bats, showing up. And I've heard to some degree that there's some of that kind of stuff going on, and some players are not getting verified. And but you would expect that to be the case when there's a lot at stake.
Yeah, talk about Robert Morris University in terms of the varsity athletics. I'm sorry, Stuart. I know that you say they're heavily involved in this.
Well, they're the first ones to offer scholarships. I mean, okay. The word scholarship, makes you think about athletics. The place in universities and colleges where esports fits isn't quite yet fully integrated into the athletic department. New Albany is sort of under the president and under some of the administrative departments, but there's been an interest in getting the athletic department integrated into these things. So when I say there's scholarships, they're not necessarily getting NCAA athletic scholarships the way you might think about it for a football player or a track and field athlete or something like that. But who cares? I mean, if your kid's getting a scholarship, that's really what you're hoping for or what the reward is. But yeah, Robert Morris was the first. New York University down in New York City started offering them in one way or another. University of Utah, I believe, is. And I believe St. Rose down the road here is also as well. UAlbany, my understanding is they're not yet formally offering aid, but these are kids who are getting recruited to some degree, or at least they will be. So there are some advantages in that as well.
Do you anticipate a presence from UAlbany at those demonstration games in Paris in 2024? And if so, do you see it possibly carrying over to other sports to help them maybe getting to recruit for basketball and football, because now people are starting to hear of UAlbany more so?
I certainly don't think there's any way to see that far ahead. What I can tell you is they're trying some very interesting promotional matchups. For example, even though UAlbany is not in the in esports in the NCAA, what they recently tried to do, and I think it was able to go forward, was to take the same teams that are in UAlbany's basketball matchups, the America East Conference, and say to those teams who are, Vermont and Binghamton and those other schools, how about we keep the same conference alignment and just, have a tournament of America East teams, even if it's not necessarily sanctioned under the NCAA. So I think there are ways that they're trying to make, their profile a little bit higher and make it more interesting for people. But I think the more likely situation is that there are going to be some players who are going to be developed and become ranked more highly because they're getting more opportunities to compete. So you might see somebody who was on the Albany team who's now gotten so much traction that they're also competing, in a professional way. So they just might coincidentally be a UAlbany student or, have played on the team at one time or another. I don't necessarily think it's going to be the fact that they were on the team, just the fact that they got a chance to develop as they were developing as a professional as well.
And will WCDB send any broadcasters to these matches?
My guess is if they have the same budget they had with us, that will not happen.
No.
No, I don't see that happening. But I could see a situation where the college radio stations and college television stations might start covering them and giving young broadcasters an opportunity to get more airtime in a sport that wasn't covered before. So it could benefit other people. It could lead to coaching opportunities, broadcasting opportunities, administration opportunities as it gets larger. So it's also opening up a lot of doors for young women as well, because as I said, there's an interest in maintaining co-ed teams, at least some level of co-ed competition. So it's, as I said before, to some degree, it's a social experiment in the sense that there aren't that many co-ed sports in society. There's mixed team tennis, doubles and, a few other situations. But this would be one that if it really got a lot of notoriety, you could see the true split, in terms of co-ed competition.
Professor, during the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was starving for entertainment, I never thought I would see the day that I would be watching cornhole on TV. And then, of course, I paid more attention to World Series of Poker, because we weren't able to really see a lot of the major sports. We really weren't. So when you put into perspective about the opportunity that esports has during a pandemic to more or less put it on the map, do you see what the correlation is? How I talk about cornhole because I never knew what it was unless I was outside a Cracker Barrel waiting for a table. And now I'm watching it on TV, and all of a sudden I'm paying attention. It's pretty interesting stuff. But yet what you have here is when you put the numbers into perspective, there's a lot more money and there's more to this esports thing than meets the eye. But I preface what I'm saying about the cornhole and all these other things taking advantage from a pandemic where you're getting exposure more so than you probably wouldn't have had otherwise. Because if you even take it a step further, nobody cared about the Korea Baseball Organization, but all of a sudden we were all starving for baseball. So why don't you try to connect the dots there?
Well, I could see a situation where the Korean Cornhole League would become very popular as well.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been in a conversation where cornhole was used 4 or 5 times in a sentence. That's very creative.
Well, you know what? I'm in the broadcasting business, professor, for 40 years, so anything is capable of coming out. So we're in the business to entertain and inform. And I think when we try to put everything into perspective, okay, now you'll have something. If I do nothing else tonight except give you a few laughs, maybe I'll give you good information for your classes as well.
Well, I was hoping you'd actually discuss pickleball at some point, but if we can't get enough time for that, we can.
Well, I'd have a hard time doing that because one of my best friends broke his 2 wrists talking about pickleball, and if he heard this broadcast, he'd clock me. So I'll let you bring it up, but it wasn't the one that I initially brought it up. But
sponsored by Ben's Delicatessen.
Yeah, right.
No.
But do you think that the pandemic has really given esports even more exposure now that we brought that up?
I think that the big difference is that there's the continuing competition in these sports during the pandemic, and that's the one sport that could, be the least impacted by it, and the one that could potentially benefit the most from it. I mean, not to stray off the topic of esports, completely, but it is shocking to me, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, that's professional sports continues through the pandemic. I mean, it's difficult, aside from understanding the economics of it, and understanding that people need some kind of escape and distraction from the constant discussion of what's going on, and in many cases the grief of losing people. But otherwise, you certainly can understand why esports continues. I have a very difficult time, even with the fact that I discuss sports in my course and build a course around it, why they made such a push. Players getting, COVID, and and they just talked about Lamar Jackson. Why did he come off the field the other night? He thought maybe he got, wasn't feeling some of the residual effects of COVID. I just, yes, I think that esports has benefited from it and continues to, be a sport that can be successful through this time. I just don't quite fully understand why the other sports are continuing, other than the fact that there's a lot of economic, there's a great deal of money on the line for it. But
well, I mean, what I'm learning from this conversation with you, Professor, is I know that many years ago, growing up as a kid, I used to follow the chess tournaments with Boris Spassky and all those people. But I'm amazed at the amount of mental is involved with the esports, even though they're not physically doing it, out there. But I would think that the toughest part about people when they're playing baseball is not only the physical part, but the mental challenges that your competitors face, more so than the physical challenges.
Well, that's the one argument that perhaps is the strongest in terms of whether esports participants are athletes. In my class, we discuss a sport as being one that has physical activity, has an intent to defeat your opponent, and has written rules and regulations. Well, certainly esports has written rules and regulations and an intent to defeat your opponent, but the question is really open about whether they are exerting any kind of physical activity. But to just finish what I think you were saying, Scott, some of these kids are in a chair 18 hours a day, particularly when they're practicing. And is that, mental, toughness or that degree of mental endurance something that would qualify them as having any kind of physical or mental activity? It's not an easy answer, but yes, I do think that there is a degree of intensity that's involved to be able to practice and play as much as they do, and in a lot of cases, it's very, very regularly.
So when you expound upon that thought, what about the parents?
Well, that's interesting because I show a documentary to my class about League of Legends, and it follows some of the more successful players in terms of their success and their prize winning. And in almost every case, even the most successful players all got a lot of pushback from their parents saying, you're wasting your time, you should be focusing on other things, you should be focusing on school, you're spending too much time on this video game, and didn't receive a lot of support from their parents until they started showing either a paycheck or just some notoriety or success in terms of wins and losses. So yeah, I don't think a lot of parents are necessarily supportive of this. I think there's a lot of parents who are pushing their kids to get athletic scholarships, especially if they didn't get one themselves or there's no other way, or they don't expect there to be any other way for those kids to go to college. I'm not aware of a lot of support from parents for kids to go with these sports as a means to an end.
So I guess it leads me to ask you this question. What about pro sports? Do you think this sports will ever dive into the pro sports arena?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, though.
Go ahead, Stuart.
So I think what he means, you have the collegiate level, where you have a New York team, a Florida team.
Well, you think it already is professional. It's sort of a pseudo structure to it. Do I ever think it's going to settle into what looks like another mainstream sport? I think it's too early to tell. But I do know that there are cities and celebrities and professional sports teams that have an interest in seeing these teams be successful and invest in a lot of money into. So could that be the end of this? I've never read anywhere where that's where the sort of the prediction of the future of sport. The real sort of out there prediction of esports is that the controllers would not simply be something that you use your thumb or your hand to control, but it would be full body control. And eventually, the prediction is that the gameplay would almost immerse the player into the game itself, because there would be so many sensors. If you ever notice in those video games if you see the behind the scenes thing where they put all those little sensor balls on the players that eventually create the angles of articulation of one player dunking differently than another in a video game. I think the predictions about esports are more that, Scott, you would put on this, set of sensors, and instead of playing Stu in Fortnite, you both would be put on the virtual reality, face masks, and almost being inside the video game itself. So therefore, it's no longer just your thumb is quicker than Stu's thumb or vice versa. Now you're getting into the athleticism of one player versus another. That changes a great deal, right? Now it really becomes more of a sport, because Stu can move his legs faster than someone else, and you can move you can duck faster than someone else when they shoot at you, and those kinds of things. So that would be a quantum leap, and that's where the predictions of the future of sport do pick up for what they expect esports to turn into.
Well, amazingly enough, you brought up a pickleball reference, but when I was going to high school in 1980, back in 1977, and this is a few years ago now, at Southfield Lathrop, nobody took racquetball and handball seriously, but one of the guys that I went to school with, I don't know if you've ever heard the name Mike Yellen.
Mike Yellen?
Yeah, Mike Yellen.
No, never heard
well,
of him.
But at any rate, nobody really took handball or racquetball seriously, but then ultimately these sports that don't get as much attention, the deeper you get into them, start to get more momentum as time goes on. Do you follow where I'm coming from? And as a result, when I see your esports taking on the same type of thing, that, the more you talk about it, the more exposure, the sky's the limit for this sort of thing, especially as we are into the 2020 decade.
Yeah.
So I just find it pretty interesting material that when you translate everything into this modern era, how it all ties together.
It does. It does, and it also ties together into the larger idea of how sports is a microcosm of the larger society, which is something that, we start off my course about, and it was actually an essay question on the final that I just gave the other day, describe 3 areas of how sports how the larger society can be tied, or as a microcosm of sport as a microcosm of the larger society. And yeah, I think there are patterns, certainly in the area of, the fact that these are becoming part of the student athlete experience. Even if they're not student athletes, these are kids who are going to be managing their time between practice and play and travel. There was a certain degree of travel involved, even though theoretically there never really has to be. But to make the experience as meaningful as possible, I know that Albany had scheduled the tournament that they were most proud of was one up in Lake Placid, which is about 2 or 3 hours north of Albany, the city of Albany, where, of course, the 1980 Winter Olympics took place. Right. I don't know if you ever heard of that one, but that was an important one too, Scott. But yeah, no, there are similarities. But it's an open book right now, as I mentioned. It's been around for a while. There's a lot of activity. It's a very specialized time for esports right now. Once things turn the corner and there's more fans going back to mainstream sports, I think that's really where the litmus test is. The 2024 Olympics are going to be a big test. And then the technology, just like anything else, is going to make a big difference as well. And if there does come a day when physical ability it becomes more in demand in esports, I think that's where you're going to see, again, a big jump. And the degree of celebrities involved with this, not only as sponsors, but also as participants.
Well, you talk about Lake Placid. Okay, my colleague George Eichhorn happened to be at one of those hockey games when I was actually in the studio producing one of our broadcasts, and he was there giving us a live report. So the Miracle on Ice resonates in my mind from Lake Placid all too well.
Right. Right.
Anything you want to add, Stuart?
No, I saw those Olympics on TV.
Oh yeah, it was unbelievable. So all right, with that said, Stuart, why don't you let everybody know that you get a hold of yourself, and Professor, feel free to give us any information, and I'll wrap up the broadcast with what we have as well. Go ahead, Stuart, please lead off.
Okay, Stuart Hack, Hack Tax and Accounting Services, located in Wellington, Florida, Palm Beach County. The one thing I want to leave you all with today, starting next week, Wednesday, you can vote for the best accountant in Palm Beach County. I have made the final 5, believe it or not. Pigs are flying, all sorts. It can only happen in 2020. So everyone, no matter whether you're in Palm Beach County or in upstate New York, you'll have the opportunity to vote for me as top accountant. If I can make it to the final 3, I get invited to the awards ceremony. Not sure if that's going to be in person or if that's going to be on Zoom, but it'll still be quite an accomplishment. So just go out and vote often.
Very good. All right, Professor Phil, the floor is yours, and then I'll take over.
Well, thank you for having me. My classes are full, so I don't need any additional publicity. But it's always fun to talk about this. I do think that I'm not sure it's being talked about as much as it might be. Any chance to talk about cornhole, Scott, it makes the a good night.
I have to tell you, Professor Phil, I've been around this business a lot. I've never been enlightened more than talking esports as I have tonight. That's for sure. So please take that as a tremendous, respectful compliment. Okay, cornhole, esports, it is what it is. All right. In terms of getting a hold of us, you can follow me on Twitter at Tribune South. That's at Tribune South. Facebook and Instagram, South Florida Tribune Gets It Done. I do have a YouTube channel for which this broadcast will appear. South Florida Tribune, subscribe for nothing, and you get to you get a little education about esports, cornhole, etc. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. We have content from our media distribution partners, columnists, as well as all the broadcasts appear on the southfloridatribune.com. Our email address is southfloridatribune@gmail.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Scott Morganroth. And the audio version of this broadcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So, Stuart, you want to give everybody the COVID message, please?
Stay safe. Stay 6 feet apart. Cover your face.
Sounds like a winner. Meanwhile, I have 2 winners here tonight. Professor Phil Lewis and Stuart Hack. My name is Scott Morganroth, Motor City Badmouth. Thanking everybody for joining us on the Sports Exchange. And we want to wish everybody a happy holiday season, a healthier new year. We can only hope 2021 is a whole lot better than 2020. So I used to think 2020 was good for eye vision, but I'll tell you what, we need to have better vision in 2021. So Professor Phil, thank you very much for being on the broadcast tonight. And Stuart, once again, as always, appreciate you being here. And look forward to hopefully the next time, Professor Phil. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.